Throughout history, people had some wild ways of dealing with adultery and fornication. From crazy whippings to downright bizarre public shaming, drowning and stoning to death, they sure knew how to keep things both interesting and terrifying. Almost every culture from ancient Greece to Puritan America has dabbled in this diabolic issue. It's time to take a trip back in time and explore the worst punishments for cheating and fooling around. Ancient Greece. Back in the early days of Rome, they were all about projecting this perfect image of marriage and family. They believed that immorality messed things up and made the whole community unstable. There's this Roman dude called Dionysius of Halicarnassus, and he actually praised Romulus, the first king of Rome, for achieving this ideal of a holy and unbreakable marriage through a single law. But here's the twist. He also mentioned adultery in the same text. So you see, even though they wanted to appear all holy and stuff, adultery was still a thing in Rome. Like, seriously, it happened. And then there's this historian guy, Plutarch, who wrote a biography of Romulus. He talked about these strict divorce laws that Romulus made. They were like, yo, wives, you can't divorce your husbands, but husbands can totally divorce you if you commit adultery. And women, beware, the punishments they dished out could be pretty severe. We're talking about the death penalty or even exile. Wow, double standard much? For an unfaithful wife, the punishment could be death. The husband, with the help of a family council or some domestic tribunal, could privately judge his wife and sentence her to the ultimate penalty or just basically kill her. In fact, Cato, the Roman senator, had this speech, which Gellius the historian quoted word for word. Cato makes it clear that husbands had the right to straight up kill their wives if they caught them red-handed committing adultery. And on top of that, there was a financial penalty. If a husband divorced his wife because of adultery, she or her family had to forfeit the entire dowry, with no chance of getting any of it back. But the husband didn't lose any property given as dowry. For example, an unfaithful wife could lose about 1/6 of the dowry, and sometimes she'd even be sent back to her father's place. So in ancient Rome, the husbands had all the power to divorce and even kill their unfaithful wives without any financial penalty, while the wives had no rights or remedies against their cheating husbands. Ancient Rome. Ancient Rome was brutal. Then there was the ancient Greeks who had this thing called moicheia, which scholars usually translate as adultery. The person committing moicheia is called a moichos. But here's the deal. The Athenians had some interesting rules around it. See, moicheia was all about getting it on with married women without their hubby's permission. Yeah, pretty scandalous stuff. But get this, it wasn't considered a crime if you hooked up with slaves or prostitutes. Go figure. Now here's where it gets even more wild. In Athenian culture, they thought seducing a married woman was way worse than straight up rape. I know, it sounds messed up, but that's how they rolled back then. Under their laws, if someone caught a moichos, they could legally kill them and call it justifiable homicide. More commonly, adulterers were taken to court, fined some moolah, or even physically abused. They even made fun of adulterers in ancient Greek comedies, showing them getting humiliated and beaten up. Well, it seems that not all stories of adultery in ancient times were filled with doom and gloom. Humans have always been prone to temptation and sexual escapades after all. The Greeks had their own unique way of dealing with such situations, and let's just say it involved a fair share of humiliation. Brace yourself for this one. The offended husband had the legal right to engage in a rather intimate act with the adulterer. Yes, you heard that right. It involved a bit of rear-end action. In some cases, the punishment took a symbolic form, like inserting a radish into the adulterer's behind. Those Greek radishes were apparently no joke, but wait, there's more. Roman writer Juvenal shares a particularly bizarre and possibly humorous tale of a betrayed husband in Rome who decided to take things to the next level. Instead of using his own member, he opted for a fish to, well, carry out the punishment. As for the unfaithful wife or mistress, she could be kicked out of her home, get divorced, lose her citizenship rights, and be denied burial in the family tomb. But if an unmarried woman got caught up in moicheia, she might end up being sold as a slave. And let's not forget that everyone had a role to play, even the betrayed husband. If a citizen failed to report adultery, he was considered guilty of being a procurer or pimp. So there was pressure to be a responsible whistleblower. There's another example where women who had unfortunate sex before marriage were put at a disadvantage when they get raped. Rape was seen as a violent act, yes, but get this. It wasn't considered a crime against the person who was raped, but against their protector. If you're a rape victim, you're not really the victim here, but the person who was supposed to be looking out for you, like your husband, dad, or guardian. Legally speaking, they treated it as damage to someone's property. The punishment? Usually a fine given by a jury in court. For the Greeks, adultery was super messed up because it involved seduction and deceit. It was like someone was trying to break the loyalty a woman had towards her family. Plus, it could lead to kids who weren't considered legit, and that was a major threat to society. You see, only the children born within a proper marriage were seen as full citizens, so adultery was a big deal and seen as a danger to the whole community. Ancient Mesopotamia. Back in ancient Mesopotamia, they had this Code of Hammurabi thing going on. Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, put it together, and it was basically a set of laws to keep everyone in line. This code had a whole bunch of rules covering a wide range of stuff. It dealt with everything from property rights and trade to family matters and criminal offenses. If you dig deeper into the Code of Hammurabi, you'll see that it totally had it in for the ladies of Babylonian society. Those laws were way harsher on women compared to the dudes. Like, seriously, women were treated like property while men held all the power. When it came to adultery, there was a clear double standard in the punishment. Scholars have pointed out that while men could often take on a second wife if the first one wasn't giving them kids, women didn't have the same freedom. But if a man's wife was caught in the act with another dude, both of them would be tied up and thrown into the water. Another messed up example is when a man's wife was accused of fooling around. Even if she wasn't caught doing anything, she had to jump into the river to prove her loyalty to her husband. It's like she's not guilty, but she still has to risk her life because of some accusation. On the other hand, if a man couldn't have kids with his wife and decided to take another wife, the second wife wouldn't be equal to the first one. And get this, if a man married a woman and she can't give him kids, and say they have a servant, and the man hooked up with her and they had a child, then this servant will be promoted to the same level as the wife. The servant wouldn't be sold for money, but maybe kept as a slave, but like VIP grade slave, poor legal wife. It's all about the patriarchy, where men had the freedom to have multiple wives and had total power over the household. Of course, the wives could also get to their wits' end as well. The thought of leaving their husband if things get too much would graze through their minds at some point. But according to the Code of Hammurabi, here's the deal when it comes to women wanting to leave their husbands. If a woman is all like, yo, I don't vibe with you anymore, she has to present valid reasons for feeling that way. If she's innocent and it's not her fault, but the husband still bails and ignores her, then she's in the clear. She can take her dowry and head back to her father's place. But hold up, it gets worse. If the woman isn't innocent and she still decides to peace out on her husband, messing up their house and neglecting him, she's in for a real bad time. The law straight up says they'll chuck her into the water. Yes, that's right, execution by drowning. So yeah, the Code of Hammurabi had some seriously messed up rules for women screwing up or trying to leave a marriage. They had to prove themselves innocent, and if they messed things up, they were looking at a watery end. But a little silver lining though, if the husband was feeling generous and forgave his wife, the king could step in and pardon the other person involved. Hammurabi really wanted to make sure people stayed loyal to their partners. Ancient Egypt and Babylon. Back in ancient Egypt, the general consensus among the people was that immorality was a big no-no. They had this unwritten law, the Maxims of Ani, on a Bulaq papyrus, which strongly condemned such behavior. It's like the wise guys were telling the young ones to stay away from those mysterious ladies from out of town who were up to no good. These ladies had a habit of seducing unsuspecting folks when no one was watching. It was a major crime, even if no one found out about it, because it led to a whole bunch of other sins. But here's the thing, even with all these righteous ideals, immorality was still pretty rampant. It's like the warning itself suggests that these prostitutes were well known in the land. Prostitution was likely quite common, and among the ranks of the courtesans, you'd find many married women whose husbands had left them. They would wander around the country, doing their thing. Now, let's talk about adultery. It was not only considered a moral wrong, but it was also a crime. They had these standards for sex morality, outlined in a document called the Negative Confession, where they specifically mentioned not defiling someone else's wife. And if you want proof that adultery was against the law, there's this text from Ramses V's reign that lists crimes committed by a shipmaster, and 2 of those crimes were adultery with married women. They even mentioned the number of children these women had and who their husbands were. It was serious stuff. Let's hear this little adulterous story. There's this tale of Ubanner, where his wife cheats on him with a peasant. And guess what? The punishment for the peasant is being thrown to a hungry crocodile, while the wife herself gets burned. Yikes. Then we have Herodotus telling us about King Pharaoh, who took all his unfaithful wives and gathered them in one town, only to set them on fire. It's also interesting to note that if a husband divorced his wife on the grounds of adultery, he had no further obligations towards her. The laws of ancient Egypt regarding public morals, especially adultery, were pretty harsh and cruel. They were no joke. If a married woman was convicted of adultery, they would go for the most noticeable feature, the nose, and slit it. They believed that losing the nose would have the greatest impact on a person's appearance, and would be the biggest blow to their charms. As for the male accomplice in adultery, he got a real beating with 1,000 lashes. Sounds pretty intense, right? Ancient China. Back in ancient China, they had some seriously brutal ways to deal with cheaters. If you got caught fooling around, you were in for a world of pain. They'd chop you up, burn you alive, or even behead you. But one punishment that really takes the cake is the pig cage. They tie up the cheating spouse and their lover with ropes and throw them into a cage. Then they dunk that cage into the deep sea. These punishments were meant to scare the living daylights out of people and make sure they stayed faithful. Ancient China wasn't playing around when it came to keeping marriages intact. It's worse for women though, because back then, men had the luxury of having multiple wives and concubines. concubines, up to 4 to be exact, while women were expected to be loyal and faithful to their husbands till the end. It was all about preserving the morals and values of the culture, and women's chastity was a big deal. Back in the days of the Qin and Han dynasty, adultery was a serious offense that could cost you your life. Ancient China had a twisted imagination when it came to punishments for cheaters. They didn't hold back with their cruelty. Some women had their eyeballs yanked out, and get this, they actually collected every drop of blood that gushed out. Others had to endure the ultimate embarrassment. They'd get tied up to stakes, spanked like crazy, and paraded around for everyone to see their shame. And it didn't stop there. Some unlucky souls faced a horrific combo of hanging, beheading, mutilation, and disembowelment. There were all sorts of messed up methods too. Flogging, beheading, burning, burial, tiger food. There was no limit to the madness. Pregnant cheaters weren't spared either. They'd tie them up and slice open their bellies, taking away the innocent life inside. It's like something out of a nightmare. And let's not forget the creative ones. Some guys got sliced in half, others turned into human pincushions with arrows. Some were tied up and thrown off cliffs, while others were dragged in the dirt behind carts. They really knew how to make cheaters pay, in the most brutal and sadistic ways imaginable. Ancient China, not a place you'd want to mess around in. One particularly brutal punishment was gongxing, a practice that involved confining women to the palace. It was a way to ensure punishment and control over those who committed adultery. As time went on in the Tang dynasty, the punishment for adultery became slightly less severe. Both men and women would face 1.5 years of imprisonment, showing a semblance of equality in punishment. Moving forward to the Ming dynasty, adulterers faced a punishment known as 80 rods. This punishment involved being severely beaten with rods, often resulting in near-death experiences or debilitating injuries. It was an incredibly harsh penalty that could leave a person permanently impaired. During the Qing dynasty, punishments for adulterous women and concubines were particularly severe. Different techniques were employed to ensure their deaths. These strict laws were put in place to maintain the morals and reputation of husbands who had multiple wives and concubines. Back in the 16th century, Emperor Shizong was not exactly popular with his harem of concubines. In a desperate attempt to escape their grim fate, 16 brave women sneaked into his chamber armed with a silken scarf and a hairpin. They were determined to give him a taste of his own medicine. A wild struggle ensued, and although the emperor managed to survive with just one eye, things didn't end well for the concubines. The punishment for their audacious act was beyond gruesome. Their limbs were brutally torn from their bodies, and to make matters worse, their heads were put on display for all to see on poles. It was a chilling warning to anyone who dared to challenge the power of the emperor. Medieval Europe. In the medieval ages, the church had some interesting views on sex and desire. They were cool with married folks getting it on for the purpose of making babies, you know, procreation and all that. But here's the twist. The church was all about putting spiritual matters above earthly desires. They believed that focusing on your spiritual journey was the real deal, like your true calling in life. So they were big on celibacy, chastity, and virginity. They saw those as the pinnacle of human existence. According to this dude, Jeffrey Richards, who wrote a book called Sex, Dissidence, and Damnation: Minority Groups in the Middle Ages, celibacy and virginity were like the highest forms of life, like the ultimate achievement. Now check this out. This other guy, Thomas Aquinas, a philosopher and theologian, believed that lust messed with one's ability to think straight and made you lose your moral compass. The church didn't deny that sex could be pleasurable, but they saw it as a powerful force that could control us. They were all like, sex just makes you want more sex. According to this guy, Nicholas of Lyra, getting pleasure from sex was considered a sin. And you know what that led to? Shame, guilt, and even depression. They believed that the sheer intensity of our carnal passions was to blame. It was like a heavy burden messing with your head and your emotions. If you were older, well, the penalties for fornication were a bit tougher on you. You see, they expected young folks to get a little frisky, but when it came to the older crowd, the punishment was more severe for them. Now, when it came to peasants, things were a bit different. They were seen as fair game, unfortunately. If a fancy nobleman had his eyes on a peasant woman and couldn't resist his urges, he might even resort to violence. But get this, they usually went easy on him. They believed that being polite or making a proper approach was a waste of time on someone they considered incapable of feeling love. Pretty messed up, right? But here's another twist. If you were a Christian and you got involved with someone who wasn't, like a Jew or a Muslim, things got really serious, like death penalty serious. They were super strict about mixing different religious backgrounds, so they reserved harsher punishments for cases like that. Oh, and when it came to married people fooling around with someone who wasn't their spouse, that was seen as a bigger sin. They really frowned upon that and considered it a more serious offense compared to unmarried folks getting together. When it came to breaking the sacred sacred bonds of marriage, those who committed adultery faced harsher punishments compared to those involved in fornication alone. Adultery was seen as a grave sin because it involved betraying marital vows and had the potential to bring forth illegitimate children. Now, there were some differing opinions among theologians on this matter, but in general, society tended to be more unforgiving towards female adulterers. There was a prevailing belief that an adulterous woman not only brought shame and dishonor upon her husband and family, but also deserved stricter penalties. The consequences for guilty women could be severe. They often faced expulsion from their homes, had their dowries confiscated by their husbands, or were even subjected to public humiliation, such as having their heads shaved and being forced to parade through the streets. Interestingly, the courts were often reluctant to punish men who took the law into their own hands and killed their wives' lovers. Overall, the idea that a woman's chastity held greater importance than a man's was widely accepted across society. Medieval France. Back in medieval France, they had some seriously crazy ways of punishing adultery. Imagine the guilty couple, stripped naked, tied together with ropes, and paraded through town like a circus show. Trumpeters blaring and people even taking swings at them with clubs. Talk about a major reputation destroyer. But here's the thing, it was the women who bore the brunt of the punishment. If the guy managed to escape, he got off scot-free while his partner faced the shame alone. The point of this whole spectacle was to publicly shame the adulterers, not inflict physical pain. It was all about permanently branding them with the scarlet letter of shame for everyone to see. And let's not forget our legendary Lady Guinevere, who had her fair share of scandalous tales. She faced accusations of adultery and treason, a double whammy. And the sentence is nothing short of horrifying, public burning at the stake. Thankfully, her knight in shining armor, Lancelot, came to her rescue, swinging his sword. Ah, the dramatic world of medieval punishments for cheating hearts. It's like a real-life soap opera full of scandal, shame, and unexpected heroes. Medieval Japan. In medieval Japan, they had this thing called the Bikaiho, which was all about dealing with adultery. It was like a set of rules that came from the samurai folks, you know, those cool warrior dudes. According to those rules, if you got caught cheating on your spouse, you could kiss half of your territory goodbye or get shipped off to a remote island. Actually, the whole adultery scene was messed up and unfair, especially for the ladies. If a woman's husband decided to cheat on her, she couldn't do squat about it legally. But if the woman got caught in the act of adultery, both her and her lover were in for a death sentence, or the husband would straight up lynch her. This is called Megataki Uchi. It's when a husband would go all vigilante and take revenge on the person who was fooling around with his wife and to his wife. There was this wild case of Chosokabe Motochika Hayakajo. Their law was like, if the hubby didn't straight up kill the cheating wife, the cheater and the wife, and the hubby himself would all be playing the death penalty game. It was like a messed up love triangle where everybody ended up losing their heads, literally. Puritan America. Let me tell you about this famous Puritan tale that almost everyone knows, The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's all about this woman named Hester Prynne, who's married, but her hubby goes missing. Now here's the twist. Hester ends up getting pregnant and the whole community loses their minds. They throw her in jail where she pops out a baby. Once she's out, things get real ugly. They make her wear a big red letter A on her clothes. A for adulteress. Poor Hester becomes a total outcast, living a life of shame and isolation. Now you might think that the whole Scarlet Letter thing was just from that famous Hawthorne book, but it turns out it was real. Back in the Puritan days, committing adultery could cost you your life. One woman named Mary Latham actually got executed for her adulterous ways. The Massachusetts Bay General Court didn't mess around. They declared adultery a capital crime in 1631. Mary was found guilty of fooling around with not just one, but 12 different dudes. She owned up to her actions and even accepted her fate execution by hanging. Here's another case from 1639, a proof that adultery was considered as a more serious offense for women than for men. It involved Mary Mendame and Tinson, who was an Indian. The court sentenced Mary to be whipped while tied to a cart's tail and wear the adulteress's badge on her left sleeve, but Tinson got a bit of a lighter sentence. He was going to be whipped with a halter around his neck at the post. Now, whipping at a cart's tail was considered way more intense than whipping at the post. It's like they wanted to make a spectacle out of it, dragging the cart through town and all. They didn't use this punishment often, only in a couple of other cases. Now let's hear Anne Linsford's story. In 1641, she confessed to doing the dirty deed and got a double whammy of whippings. First, she was publicly whipped at the post in Plymouth, then they dragged her sorry self to Yarmouth for another round of lashings. On top of that, she had to rock the scarlet letters AD on her clothes for everyone to see. Eventually, in 1658, the laws were revised. They finally laid down a specific punishment for adultery. If you got caught in the act, they'd whip you not once, but twice. Yep, you'd feel that sting on your backside 2 separate times, but that's not all. They wanted everyone to know what you did, so they made you wear these big letters on your clothes. They'd sew them on your arm or your back and the letters were AD for adultery. And here's the thing, if you ever got caught without those letters while you were still in the government's territory, they'd whip you again. So, no sneaking around for those adulterers. They wanted to make sure you paid for your sin loud and clear. Can you imagine walking around with a big red letter screaming adulterer for everyone to see? Talk about a lasting reminder of your mistake.